A vast ancient society vanished without leaving a single weapon behind. The Indus Valley civilization perfected urban living over 4,000 years ago, creating the world's first planned cities with grids of streets and advanced plumbing. Yet its story ends with one of history's most profound silences. By the end of this, you will understand how a civilization can disappear not with a bang, but with a whisper. We will explore how a changing climate might have dismantled its foundations and why its remarkable peace could not save it. What does it mean for a society to simply fade from the world? This was a civilization built on a foundation of water and wheat. The Indus River, a powerful artery of life, flowed down from the Himalayas, carrying not just water but rich silt that painted the plains a deep, fertile brown each year. This predictable bounty was the engine of everything. Farmers cultivated vast fields of barley and wheat, and communities learned to store surplus grain in large, raised granaries. This stability meant that for centuries, no one needed to fight their neighbor for a meal. The surplus created something extraordinary: time. Time not spent in constant struggle for survival could be spent on planning, on building, on creating. From this agricultural wealth, the first towns grew, not as fortified hilltops watching for enemies, but as practical settlements near the life-giving river. They were communities of farmers and herders who understood that their shared prosperity depended on the river's rhythm, not on the strength of their weapons. This relationship with the land fostered a culture of incredible practicality and consensus. When they decided to build a city, they did not build a palace for a king first. They built a bathhouse. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro is a stunning testament to this priority. A large, watertight pool made with precisely cut bricks and sealed with tar, likely used for communal rituals. It speaks of a society that valued collective cleanliness and perhaps spiritual purity over displays of individual power. The entire urban layout reflects this shared mindset. Streets were laid out in a near-perfect grid, with standardized bricks used across cities hundreds of miles apart. Houses, many with their own wells and sophisticated drainage systems that connected to city-wide sewers, suggest a remarkable concern for public health and private comfort. There is no evidence of a royal quarter, no grand tombs filled with treasure for the afterlife. The wealth seems to have been invested in the community itself, in infrastructure that served everyone. This points to a form of governance that was likely more administrative than autocratic, managed by a class of planners and priests who maintained the complex systems of grain storage, water distribution, and trade. Their authority seems to have been derived from their role in preserving the harmony and function of the whole, not from a divine right to command armies. This created a social contract unlike any in the ancient world, one where security came from well-maintained walls against floods, not from walls against men. But this entire magnificent system, this peaceful empire, had one critical vulnerability. It was perfectly adapted to a specific world, a world with a reliable river and predictable rains. Its success was its specialization, and like any highly specialized organism, it could thrive only within a very narrow band of conditions. The very peace that defined it may have left it uniquely unprepared for the kind of slow, relentless crisis that was quietly brewing in the distant mountains, a change that no amount of civic planning or communal goodwill could simply engineer away. The river's rhythm, the very pulse they had built their world upon, began to change. For generations, the annual flood was a promise, a delivery of silt and water that made the plains bloom. But what happens when that promise is broken? The first theory for their disappearance points not to an invasion, but to a slow, environmental betrayal. Around 4,000 years ago, the climate of the region began to shift. Monsoon patterns that had reliably watered the interior started to weaken, and the great river system itself became unstable. This was not a single catastrophic event, but a creeping crisis. Imagine the life-giving Saraswati River, a major artery of the civilization celebrated in later hymns, gradually shrinking over decades from a powerful flow to a series of scattered ponds, and finally to a memory etched in dry sand. Geological studies of ancient riverbeds and sediment cores tell this story clearly. The water was retreating. At the same time, the Indus River itself grew erratic. Tectonic shifts, the slow grinding of continental plates far below, may have altered its course, causing devastating floods in some areas while starving others entirely. A field that had fed a family for a century could be buried under choking silt one year and transformed into cracked, barren earth the next. For a civilization whose entire surplus, its entire reason for being, was built on predictable agriculture, this was an existential threat. Crop yields would have plummeted. The grain stores in those meticulously built granaries would have emptied, and no amount of civic planning could replenish them from a failing landscape. The social contract began to fray. Why stay in a magnificent city with perfect drains if there is no food? Their profound peacefulness, once their greatest strength, now became a potential liability. There was no standing army, no centralized authority with the power to commandeer resources and enforce a desperate, large-scale response. Decisions were likely made by consensus, a brilliant system for maintaining harmony in good times, but potentially too slow and fragmented for a crisis of this magnitude. There was no pharaoh to order the grain to be moved, no emperor to marshal labor for massive irrigation projects to chase the receding waters. The response was likely local, community by community, as people made the only rational choice left. They picked up what they could and left, dispersing back toward smaller, more sustainable villages near reliable water sources, or eastward toward the rising rainfall of the Ganges plain. The cities were not sacked, they were simply emptied, room by room, street by street, until the only sounds were the wind and the slow creep of sand over brick. But a changing environment does more than just empty granaries. It can quietly weaken the people themselves. As resources dwindled and populations concentrated around shrinking oases, new challenges would have emerged within the very bodies of the citizens, setting the stage for a second, more invisible wave of decline. The very systems that defined their civilization may have become their undoing. Those sophisticated drains and public baths speak of a society deeply aware of the connection between cleanliness and community health. But what happens when the environment turns against that careful order? A shift in the monsoon could have done more than just dry up fields. It could have corrupted their water supply. Imagine a once reliable river now flowing sluggishly, its banks dotted with stagnant pools warmed by the sun. These would have been perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes carrying malaria, or for water contaminated with pathogens that cause dysentery and cholera. Their advanced sanitation, designed for a stable climate, might have been overwhelmed by repeated, unpredictable floods that backed up those very drains, spreading contamination instead of containing it. Furthermore, their vast trade networks, which brought lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and carnelian from Gujarat, were highways for more than just goods. They could have been conduits for invisible threats. A merchant caravan or a shipment of goods from a distant region might have introduced a novel illness to a population with no prior exposure, and thus no immunity. In such dense, interconnected cities, a pathogen could have spread with terrifying speed. We find no mass graves from battles, but studies of skeletal remains from the later periods of these cities tell a quieter, more somber story. They often show markers of chronic malnutrition and stress, alongside evidence of infectious disease. This paints a picture of a population under sustained biological pressure, where each season of poor harvests weakened bodies, making everyone more susceptible to the next wave of illness. A peaceful, cooperative society, governed by consensus and shared responsibility, might have been tragically ill-equipped to handle a crisis of this nature. There was likely no central authority with the unquestioned power to impose strict quarantines, to control the movement of a frightened populace, or to commandeer resources for the sick. The social trust that held the cities together could have fractured under the strain of a prolonged epidemic. As fear overwhelmed communal bonds, neighbors might have begun to view each other as potential sources of contagion. The logical response, once again, was dispersal. Families would have left the crowded, increasingly unhealthy urban centers for the relative safety of isolated villages, breaking the networks of specialized labor and trade that made the civilization function. This biological downturn would have struck at the heart of their economic engine, as skilled artisans fell ill, as traders stopped their journeys, and as farmers could no longer work the fields. The complex system of production and exchange that defined the Indus world would have ground to a halt. The civilization did not collapse from a single blow, but from a cascade of failures where ecological stress triggered a health crisis, which in turn unraveled the economic fabric. Yet, even as their world frayed from within, a new cultural force was gathering strength on the outskirts of their territory, one whose very different way of life would eventually write over the memory of the Indus cities. Their prosperity was woven across continents. For centuries, Indus merchants sailed the Arabian Sea and sent caravans overland, their goods traveling thousands of miles. Carnelian beads etched with startling white patterns, delicate cotton cloth that was a marvel to the wool-wearing world, and intricately carved ivory seals found their way to the great cities of Mesopotamia. In return, the Indus cities received silver, tin, and lapis lazuli, that deep blue stone from the mountains of Afghanistan. This was not mere commerce, it was the lifeblood of their cultural unity. The wealth generated funded civic projects, supported specialized artisans, and created a shared identity across a region the size of Western Europe. A potter in Harappa and a merchant in Lothal, though separated by vast distances, were part of the same intricate web. Their civilization was held together by mutual benefit, not by military force. But a web is only as strong as its threads, and those threads were beginning to snap. The first strain came from within. As the climate shifted and harvests failed, the economic foundation crumbled. You cannot trade what you cannot produce. The surplus grain that had fed the non-farming artisans, the weavers, the bead makers, and the metalworkers simply disappeared. Workshops would have fallen silent. A master carver might have put down his tools to help his family scavenge for food, and that specialized skill, honed over a lifetime, was lost to the next generation. At the very moment their internal production was faltering, external pressures mounted. New trade rivals emerged. Other civilizations, perhaps in Mesopotamia or the Persian Gulf, developed their own sources of luxury goods or established more efficient routes. Meanwhile, the Indus ports themselves may have been choking. Tectonic shifts or silt carried by the erratic rivers could have filled their harbors, stranding their ships far from the sea. One by one, the trade routes went dark. The consequence of this economic collapse was a profound cultural unraveling. With no central treasury or powerful king to redistribute resources or mandate standards, each community was left to fend for itself. The beautiful, standardized weights and measures that had ensured fair trade from one city to another lost their meaning. Why would a struggling village on the periphery continue to bake bricks to the exact same ratio as the great cities, if those cities could no longer offer anything in return? The incentive to maintain the grand Indus way of life evaporated. People began to simplify, to localize. Pottery styles became less refined, more utilitarian. The written script, once used on seals for trade and administration, fell out of use because there was no larger network to read it. It was not an invasion that erased their culture, but a slow forgetting. The shared dreams, the technical knowledge, the artistic traditions, they faded not because they were destroyed, but because the economic engine that powered them had stopped. Communities turned inward, focusing on survival in a smaller, poorer world. This quiet disintegration of economy and identity creates the final, haunting question. When a civilization's physical presence dissolves, what happens to its soul, to its ideas and beliefs? As the last traders packed away their scales, a profound transformation was already underway in the minds and rituals of the people left behind. Their world did not end at the city walls. As the rivers grew unreliable and the old ways became unsustainable, the most logical act was not to fight but to leave. This was not a panicked flight but a calculated generational shift. Families, then whole communities, made the difficult choice to abandon the grand urban experiment their ancestors had built. They packed their tools, their seeds, and their memories, and they walked away from the grid of streets and the silent bathhouses, moving steadily toward the promise of reliable water. Archaeological maps tell this story silently but powerfully. Around 1900 BC, the great cities of the Indus Valley show clear signs of depopulation and decline. Buildings were not rebuilt with the same care, and the meticulous civic standards began to relax. Yet, at the very same time, hundreds of miles to the east and south, a new pattern emerges. Small, rural settlements begin to appear in the fertile Ganges River basin and across the Deccan Plateau. These were not the planned cities of old, but simpler villages adapted to new landscapes. This is the evidence of a great migration, a peaceful diaspora where people carried their civilization with them in their knowledge and their hands. They were not conquered, they simply dispersed, seeking a future their homeland could no longer provide. This movement brought them into contact with other cultures already living in those regions, like the communities known for their distinctive ochre-colored pottery. The interaction was likely slow and organic, a gradual blending of peoples over centuries. The migrating Indus families brought with them invaluable gifts, advanced knowledge of metallurgy, pottery techniques, sophisticated weights and measures for trade, and a deep understanding of urban water management. These skills did not vanish, they were shared and absorbed. This idea is known as the continuity hypothesis, and it suggests that the Indus civilization did not so much disappear as it transformed, its essence weaving into the fabric of a new emerging world. Think of the profound importance of ritual bathing and purification in later Indian traditions, a possible echo of the spiritual significance once held by the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro. Certain artistic motifs, like the pipal tree or figures in meditative postures, seem to resonate across the millennia. This was not a replacement, but an assimilation. The story reframes the entire narrative. We are not looking at a mysterious extinction, but at an evolution, a cultural metamorphosis so complete that the original form became unrecognizable. This prompts a deeper question about the society itself. What internal qualities must a people possess to choose such a quiet, collective dispersal over conflict? Their legacy was not written in stone monuments to kings, but in the living practices of the descendants who carried a fragment of their world into an unknown future. Yet, if so much was carried forward, why does their written language, the most direct voice of their thoughts, remain utterly silent to us? The greatest clue to their inner world is also our most enduring mystery. The most resilient structures are not made of brick but of belief. For centuries, the Indus civilization was held together by something invisible, a powerful social consensus. The evidence is in their remarkable uniformity, the standardized bricks used from one city to another, the similar sizes of houses in early neighborhoods, suggesting a society where shared purpose mattered more than individual grandeur. This was likely reinforced by a common ideology, perhaps a religious or spiritual framework that emphasized harmony with the natural world and collective well-being. Their peace was not an accident, it was a principle built into their streets and their souls. But what happens to a principle when the world it was designed for starts to fall apart? As the rivers shifted and harvests dwindled, that foundational consensus would have faced its greatest test. In a time of plenty, equality is easy to maintain. When scarcity arrives, the social contract begins to fray at the edges. While we still see no signs of a king or a ruling warrior elite, subtle archaeological clues hint at a society under new kinds of pressure. In later periods, slight variations appear in burial offerings, with some individuals laid to rest with a few more pottery vessels or personal ornaments than others. Access to certain well-maintained neighborhoods or to the dwindling clean water supply might have become uneven. These are not the marks of a violent uprising, but of a quiet, creeping stratification, where the burden of a changing climate was not borne equally by all. This emerging inequality would have been corrosive to a culture built on cooperation. Imagine a community where for generations, every family's home was built to a similar plan, and every citizen contributed to and benefited from the public granaries. Then, during a series of poor harvests, some families begin to hoard what little they have, or influential planners divert resources to secure their own neighborhood's water channel. The shared trust, the very glue of the civilization, would begin to dissolve. A peaceful society that never developed institutions for centralized control or for suppressing internal conflict might have had few tools to mend these tears. There was no police force, no standing army to enforce fairness or quell disputes over a failing well. Resolution relied on the very consensus that was now breaking down. When the old ways no longer provided security, faith in the ideology itself would have wavered. Why adhere to the complex rules of urban living, to the maintenance of communal baths and city-wide drains, if the system no longer feeds your children? The grand projects that required thousands to cooperate, like dredging silted canals or rebuilding flood-damaged city walls, would have been abandoned not by decree, but by 1,000 individual decisions to focus on one's own family. This is the theory of social dissolution. The civilization did not just face ecological and economic collapse, it suffered a crisis of faith in its own idea. Communities increasingly turned inward, focusing on local survival over the grand collective identity. The great cities, which only functioned through widespread participation, were slowly deserted not by invaders but by a loss of collective will. People retreated to smaller, more manageable village units where they could directly control their own fate. This internal fragmentation perfectly complements the other theories, showing how external pressures like drought or illness can catalyze a deeper spiritual decay. It leads us to a final, haunting possibility. If the shared belief that built this world could fade, could it have been replaced by another? Could the quiet dispersal of the Indus people have paved the way for a completely new way of seeing the world to take root in the very land they left behind? Their spiritual world was etched in stone. Among the most captivating artifacts they left behind are the small, square seals, carved from steatite and fired to a fine finish. These were not royal decrees but personal stamps likely used by merchants to mark goods. Yet their imagery speaks volumes. We see a figure seated in a cross-legged posture, deep in contemplation, surrounded by animals. We see a powerful, hump-backed bull, a unicorn-like creature, and symbols that may represent elements of nature. This is not the art of conquest but of connection. A visual language hinting at a belief system intertwined with the natural world and perhaps early forms of meditation or ritual. Their spirituality seems to have been centered on harmony, fertility, and cycles, a perfect mirror for a society dependent on the predictable rhythms of a river. But what happens to a faith built on harmony when the world becomes chaotic? If your gods are in the river and the river fails and the harvest withers, what then? A prolonged environmental crisis would not just be an agricultural disaster. It could be seen as a spiritual failure, a sign that the old rituals no longer pleased the powers that be. The authority of the priests and planners, who likely derived their power from maintaining this cosmic and civic order, would have been profoundly undermined. When the baths and the granaries no longer functioned, the ideology that justified them may have lost its meaning. This could have sparked a quiet revolution in thought, a gradual turning away from the grand, urban-centered ceremonies that required stable communities and surplus resources. As people dispersed into smaller, migratory groups, their spiritual needs changed. Elaborate pool-based rituals in a crumbling city were impractical for a herder moving with the seasons. New forms of worship, portable and immediate, would have taken hold. The later Vedic traditions, whose hymns were composed after the Indus cities were silent, offer a fascinating contrast. Their sacred practices centered on fire sacrifices, Agni, a mobile god who could travel with the people. Their society was pastoral and clan-based, organized around chieftains and warriors, a stark departure from the urban, bureaucratic peace of the Indus. This is not to say one culture directly replaced the other, but rather that the ideological vacuum left by the fading Indus world was filled by a system better adapted to the new, fragmented reality. The peaceful, consensus-based nature of the Indus civilization made it uniquely vulnerable to such a paradigm shift. Its leaders ruled through spiritual legitimacy and successful administration, not through fear or military might. When their administration failed to stop the droughts and their spiritual legitimacy was questioned by the failing sky, there was no army to enforce compliance, no throne to demand loyalty. People were free to simply believe something else, to follow new voices that promised a different path to security in an unstable world. This ideological sunset was likely the final, gentle erasure. It was not an invasion of ideas, but an evolution of belief driven by necessity. The old symbols on the seals lost their potency. The scripts that may have recorded their prayers became indecipherable even to their own grandchildren, and the stories that held their identity together were slowly replaced by new ones. This transformation from within brings us to the ultimate source of our mystery, the silent ground beneath our feet. Everything we think we know, every theory of climate or culture or commerce, must answer to the physical evidence or the profound lack of it left in the earth. The ground at Mohenjo-Daro does not whisper of kings or conquests. To walk through its excavated streets is to witness a profound and deliberate quiet. Archaeologists have carefully brushed away millennia of dust to reveal a raised citadel mound, a place of prominence in any other ancient city. Yet here they found no armories filled with spears, no barracks for soldiers, no grand palace complex from which a ruler could command an army. The seals, those tiny windows into their world, depict bulls and unicorns and meditative figures, but never a scene of battle, a bound prisoner, or a triumphant king standing over a foe. Even the pottery, often a canvas for a society's stories, shows no warriors or scenes of conflict. This absence is not an accident of preservation. It is a deafening silence in the typical narrative of how early states were built. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, power was etched in stone, celebrated in towering pyramids and victory stelae that glorified pharaohs and kings as divine warriors. The Indus Valley chose a different monument. Their grandest surviving structure is not a fort or a tomb, but the Great Bath, a meticulously engineered pool for water, likely used for purification and communal ritual. This tells us that their concept of authority was rooted in something other than military might. The evidence of their power lies instead in the mundane, in the remarkable consistency of their daily life. Across hundreds of miles, bricks were baked to the same ratio. Weights for measuring goods were carved from stone in a perfect, standardized system, with units that doubled in a precise progression like 1, 2, 4, 8, and so on. This points to a powerful, widespread administration, but one obsessed with fairness in trade, the smooth flow of commerce, and the harmony of public works, not with conquest. The artifacts that fill their cities are tools for creation, not destruction: plowshares, pottery wheels, bead drills, and weaving implements. Even the few human figurines we have seem to represent dancers or deities, adorned with elaborate headdresses but never with weapons or armor. This evidentiary void is itself a form of proof. It strongly argues that this civilization did not meet a violent, sudden end at the hands of an invader, for there is no layer of ash from a great burning, no skeletons fallen in streets clutching weapons, no new cultural artifacts abruptly overlying the old. The silence steers us away from tales of war and toward slower, more insidious causes, like a changing climate or a fraying social contract. Yet this very silence also presents our greatest challenge. How do we interpret a world that left no boastful kings to tell its story? We are left to read meaning into what is not there, to understand a society by the wars it did not fight and the palaces it did not build. This forces us to confront the limits of archaeology itself, and to ask what crucial pieces of this ancient puzzle might be forever missing from our grasp. This silence is not just in their streets but in their very words. We have thousands of their artifacts, small stone seals and pottery fragments, each marked with elegant, compact symbols. These are not random scratches but a deliberate script, a true written language with a consistent set of signs used across the entire civilization. And yet, for all our modern technology and linguistic skill, we cannot read a single sentence. It is like holding a beautifully locked diary, its cover etched with intricate designs but having no key to open it. The inscriptions are frustratingly brief, most containing only 4 or 5 symbols, likely used for names, titles, or short dedicatory phrases on trade goods. Unlike the Rosetta Stone, which gave us the same text in 3 known languages, no bilingual inscription has ever been found for the Indus script. We have no parallel text, no dictionary, no way to anchor these mysterious symbols to a sound or a meaning we understand. This means the civilization's own voice is completely absent from its history. We have no chronicles of their kings, no records of a great drought written by a scribe who lived through it, no prayers to their gods begging for the rains to return. We are left as outsiders, interpreting the empty rooms and scattered tools of a house whose owners left no note. Our only contemporary mentions come from far away, in the clay tablet archives of Mesopotamia. These trade documents speak of a distant land called Meluha, a place that exported carnelian, ivory, and exotic woods. The records are strictly commercial, noting the arrival of ships and the quality of goods. They tell us nothing of Meluha's politics, its social strife, or if its merchants one day simply stopped coming. This profound linguistic barrier forces historians into a unique position. We must reconstruct an entire civilization's rise and fall using only the physical objects they left behind, reading meaning into the absence of weapons and the slow decline of brick quality. It makes the theory of a peaceful fade away compelling, because the material record shows no signs of violent conquest, but it also makes it impossible to prove absolutely. Without their own written testimony, we cannot know if they saw the changing climate as a crisis sent by angry gods or simply as a slow turn of fate. We cannot confirm if the abandonment of their cities was a planned collective migration or a desperate scattered flight. We are interpreting a profound silence. This challenge connects to a deeper question in archaeology. How do we define a collapse when the people who lived through it cannot tell us their story? Is it the end of a political system, the dispersal of a population, or the death of an idea? For the Indus Valley, the collapse seems to have been the quiet unraveling of a way of life, so complete that even the memory of how to read their own name was lost. The script, their final and most intimate mystery, remains a locked door, and behind it may lie the simple, human reasons for why they chose to walk away from everything they had built. Perhaps we have been asking the wrong question all along. The word collapse carries a weight of finality, of sudden ruin, like a building crumbling in an earthquake. But what if the story of the Indus Valley is not one of an ending, but of a profound and deliberate change of shape? From our modern perspective, we view the abandonment of great cities as a catastrophic failure, the ultimate defeat of a civilization. Yet for the people living through those centuries of change, it may have been the most rational and successful adaptation possible. This process is sometimes called deurbanization or ruralization. It is not a collapse, but a strategic retreat from a specific way of life that was no longer sustainable. The sophisticated urban model, with its grids and granaries, required a massive, stable agricultural surplus to feed its non-farming specialists. When the climate could no longer guarantee that surplus, the model itself became a liability. Staying in the city meant starvation, leaving it meant survival. So they left, but they did not vanish. They carried their knowledge with them into a new, more flexible existence. Across the plains, the great urban centers slowly emptied, but the population did not disappear from the earth. They redistributed themselves into smaller, more resilient communities, villages that could be sustained by local springs and smaller plots of land. This was not a failure of civilization, but a brilliant recalibration of it. The evidence for this transformation is etched in the continuity we see afterward. The beautiful, standardized pottery styles of the Indus cities gradually evolved into more localized forms, but the craft of pottery itself never died out. Advanced metallurgical techniques for working copper did not vanish, they spread. The system of weights and measures, so crucial for trade, influenced later systems in the region. Even certain artistic motifs, like the reverence for the pipal tree or figures in seated postures, seem to echo in later cultural traditions. From this angle, the complete absence of war makes perfect, logical sense. There was no centralized state to conquer, no royal citadel to storm, because the very idea of that centralized state had peacefully dissolved. An invading army would have arrived to find not a mighty kingdom to plunder, but a landscape of quiet, dispersing communities who were already in the process of moving on. The real story is not of a people being defeated, but of a people choosing a different path to resilience. This reframing challenges our entire understanding of historical progress. We are conditioned to see history as a linear march toward greater complexity, with cities and states as the pinnacle of human achievement. The Indus narrative suggests another pathway, one where complexity is not an end in itself, but a tool, one that can be wisely set aside when conditions change. It invites a fascinating comparison. Think of the so-called Dark Ages in Europe after the fall of Rome. From the perspective of a Roman senator, it was a collapse of order, law, and engineering. But from the perspective of a local farmer, it may have been a liberation from distant imperial taxes and the heavy hand of a fading bureaucracy, a shift to a more localized, self-sufficient life. The Indus transformation was likely far more peaceful, but the principle is similar, a society shedding a layer of complexity that had become a burden. This view does not romanticize hardship, but it does grant agency and intelligence to those ancient communities. They were not helpless victims of their environment. They were pragmatic survivors who read the signs of a changing world and made a collective, centuries-long decision to transform. Their legacy, therefore, is not found in a single ruined city, but in the enduring threads of culture, technology, and belief that they wove into the fabric of the subcontinent, threads that remain part of the pattern to this day. Their story is not a solitary mystery in the ancient world. To truly understand the Indus silence, we must listen for echoes in other lost civilizations. Consider the classic Maya, whose magnificent stone cities in the jungles of Central America were, for centuries, thought to have been conquered by foreign armies. Yet modern archaeology tells a different tale. Like the Indus, the Maya faced intense environmental pressure, a series of prolonged droughts that strained their agricultural systems. Their political world, a patchwork of competing city-states, fragmented further under this strain. The result was not a single, catastrophic invasion, but a gradual, city-by-city abandonment. People left the great ceremonial centers like Tikal and Palenque, not because they were driven out by force, but because the social and environmental contract that sustained those places had broken. Similarly, the brilliant Minoan civilization on Crete, with its sprawling palace complexes and vibrant art, saw its influence wane not from a sudden war, but from a combination of natural disasters, likely the colossal eruption of Thera, and the resulting economic disruption to their sea-based trade networks. These parallels are illuminating. They show us that complex societies can indeed come apart at the seams without a clear, violent coup de grace. A confluence of pressures, environmental shifts, economic fragility, and social stress can lead to a quiet unraveling. This broader pattern helps normalize the Indus story, placing it within a recognizable historical category. Yet, the Indus case stands at the far end of this spectrum. The Maya, for all their environmental woes, left behind vivid artwork depicting captive-taking and conflict between rival lords. Their history, recorded in their own glyphs, speaks of alliances and enmities. The Minoan world, while often portrayed as peaceful, shows evidence of fortifications in its later periods. The Indus Valley presents us with something more profound, an almost complete absence of the iconography or infrastructure of war from beginning to end. This makes it an extreme and therefore incredibly instructive example. By comparing it to these other civilizations, we can start to isolate the unique variables that made its dissolution so peaceful. What did the Indus have, or more importantly, not have, that set it apart? Its radical decentralization seems key. Without a centralized king or a standing army, there was no single point of failure that could be toppled in battle, but also no central authority capable of orchestrating a massive, coercive response to crisis. Its identity and wealth were built almost entirely on commerce and consensus, rather than on conquest or tribute. When the trade routes faltered and the consensus shattered, there was no fallback position, no military structure to hold things together by force. The society simply lost its cohesion and dispersed. These historical mirrors do not provide easy answers, but they refine our questions. They turn the spotlight away from looking for a mythical invading horde and toward the intricate, vulnerable systems that sustain any civilization. They prepare us to look more closely at the one variable that appears as a common thread in so many of these stories, a changing sky and a restless earth. To solve the Indus puzzle, we must now examine the very climate they lived within, reading the story not in their artifacts, but in the ancient mud and pollen they left behind. The true story of their final days is not written in clay, but in ice. Deep within the glaciers of Greenland and the high caves of Oman, scientists have found a library of the ancient sky, a record of the very climate that cradled and then challenged the Indus world. This field, paleoclimatology, reads history from nature's own archives. Tiny air bubbles trapped in millennia-old ice cores tell us the composition of the ancient atmosphere. Stalagmites growing slowly upward from cave floors lock within their mineral layers a chemical diary of past rainfall. The rings of ancient trees, each one a perfect record of a single year's growth, whisper of seasons of plenty and times of want. When these records from across the globe are synchronized, they reveal a startling pattern. The timeline of the Indus civilization's fading, roughly between 2200 and 1900 BC, aligns precisely with a profound climatic event, a mega-drought that gripped much of the eastern hemisphere. This was not a local dry spell, but a planetary shift. For the Indus Valley, the mechanism was a critical change in the monsoon. Data pulled from sediment cores in the Arabian Sea show a significant weakening of the winter monsoon winds during this period. These winds were crucial, for they brought the rains that would have replenished the rivers and recharged the groundwater in the crucial months between the summer deluges. With this system faltering, the entire hydrological cycle that the civilization was built upon began to stutter. The great rivers, the Saraswati and the Indus, would not have received their necessary recharge. Their flows became less predictable, prone to devastating floods one year and a trickle the next. This scientific evidence transforms the idea of a shifting river from a speculative theory into a well-supported physical reality. We are no longer just interpreting empty granaries. We are matching them to a demonstrable, centuries-long drought written in the chemistry of cave stone and sea mud. This convergence of archaeology and climatology creates a powerful and sobering narrative. It paints a picture of a highly sophisticated society, perfectly adapted to a specific environmental niche, facing a slow-moving catastrophe of a scale it could not possibly engineer its way out of. Their brilliant urban planning, their intricate drainage, their surplus grain storage, all of it was designed for a world of reliable water. When that reliability vanished, their greatest strengths became irrelevant. The agricultural crisis was now inevitable. Fields that had fed thousands for generations would have yielded less each season, the soil becoming saline and parched. This was a trigger, a credible and global trigger for the unraveling we see in the archaeological record. Yet, this climatic explanation does not diminish the people of the Indus. It deepens their story. It raises a profound question about resilience. In the face of such a relentless environmental pressure, what technological or agricultural adaptations did they attempt, and why might those efforts have ultimately fallen short against a changing sky? The fields that fed an empire were the first to feel the change. For generations, Indus farmers were masters of their environment, their lives synchronized with the river's gentle pulse. They cultivated a diverse and resilient mix of crops, wheat and barley for bread, peas and dates for sustenance, and even cotton for cloth, a revolutionary innovation. Their system was a masterpiece of low technology and high observation, relying on the annual flood to naturally irrigate and fertilize their fields. They built simple channels to guide the water and small embankments to protect their plots, a community-based approach that worked perfectly within a stable, predictable world. Their success was the bedrock of everything. The surplus grain from these fields filled the public granaries, which in turn fed the artisans, the traders, the planners, and the priests who built the cities. But this entire elegant system had a critical flaw. It was designed for a river that kept its promises. When the climate shifted and the river broke its ancient rhythm, the farmers' carefully honed adaptations were suddenly useless. A field perfectly prepared for a gentle, nourishing flood could be utterly destroyed by a torrential, scouring deluge the following year. The real danger was often what the water left behind. When floodwaters recede slowly under a hot sun, they leave a toxic gift, salt. Evaporation pulls moisture up through the soil, drawing dissolved salts to the surface, where they form a thin, white crust. This is soil salinity, a silent killer of fertility. A field can look intact, but beneath that crust, the salty earth burns the roots of young plants, stunting growth and slashing yields. For farmers watching their livelihood literally crystallize before their eyes, the feeling must have been one of profound helplessness. Their local, community-based methods were no match for a problem of this scale, a problem that required large-scale, coordinated drainage projects to flush the salts away. And here, the peaceful, decentralized nature of the Indus civilization may have sealed its agricultural fate. Unlike in Egypt, where a powerful pharaoh could command thousands to dig and maintain vast irrigation canals across the kingdom, the Indus world shows no evidence of such monumental, state-directed waterworks. Water management appears to have been a local responsibility. This meant there was no central authority with the power to mobilize an entire region to dredge river channels. build massive reservoirs, or construct continents spanning canals to redirect the erratic waters. Each village, each city was left to confront the crisis alone with its own limited labor and resources. The result was a slow, patchwork collapse. One by one, the bread baskets failed. The grain that flowed into the cities slowed to a trickle and then stopped. The economic engine of the civilization, which had hummed for centuries on agricultural surplus, began to seize. You cannot trade pottery for food that does not exist. You cannot pay a beadmaker in barley that never grew. This agricultural unraveling did more than empty granaries. It directly attacked the health and cohesion of the society itself, setting in motion a chain reaction of hardship that would reach into every home and every body in the once thriving cities. The beadmaker's hands, once busy with carnelian and lapis, grew still. In the later layers of Mohenjo-Daro, the story is told not in grand ruins but in quiet absences and subtle decay. The beautiful, standardized pottery that had been a hallmark of Indus unity begins to change. The forms become simpler, less refined. The once vibrant paints fade to utilitarian browns. This is not a sudden drop in skill, but a slow unraveling of the system that supported that skill. When the trade networks bringing in precious stones and metals broke down, the specialist who spent a lifetime learning to drill perfect holes in carnelian had nothing to work with. When the grain surplus vanished, the community could no longer afford to feed a full-time potter who produced only the most exquisite painted ware. Specialization, the engine of their urban sophistication, became a luxury they could no longer sustain. Walk through a neighborhood in those final centuries. The public well, once meticulously lined with brick, shows cracks that go unrepaired. The central drain, a marvel of civic engineering, begins to clog with debris no one clears. A house is abandoned, its wooden doorframe rotting away, and the wind slowly fills its rooms with a fine, silent dust. The great granaries stand mostly empty, their vast chambers echoing. The marketplaces, once buzzing with merchants from distant lands, now host only local exchanges of basic goods, some grain, a few clay pots, simple tools. The meticulous urban maintenance that had defined the Indus world for 1,000 years was a collective project, and it required a collective will. As that will fragmented under the strain of scarcity, the city itself began to gently return to the earth. For the families who remained, life contracted in scale but deepened in immediate necessity. The grand identity of being a citizen of a planned metropolis gave way to the more pressing concerns of a household, a clan, a village. Knowledge did not disappear, it changed form. A father might still teach his son how to work copper, but now to mend a plowshare for their own field, not to craft elaborate ornaments for a far-off market. The focus turned inward and local, from participating in a continental cultural complex to securing the next season's harvest from a nearby plot. This shift from urban to rural was likely a pragmatic, generational adaptation. It was not a single, tragic event, but 1,000 individual decisions to seek a more sustainable life elsewhere, a gradual migration from the complex to the simple. This lived experience of decline was the quiet end of a profound experiment. The Indus had shown that large-scale, peaceful urban living was possible, that a society could organize itself around shared infrastructure and fair commerce rather than royal decree and military force. Yet their story also reveals the fragility of that model when its environmental and economic foundations crumbled. Their transformation asks us to reconsider what we mean by collapse. For the people living through it, this was not an apocalypse but a recalibration, a strategic return to a smaller, more resilient way of life that could weather the changing climate. The great cities were not destroyed, they were simply left behind like a shell outgrown. This peaceful fading raises a final, compelling question. If their physical world transformed so completely, what of their spirit? What traces of their unique vision survived the dust to whisper into the future? their silent cities left a question that echoes through millennia. Did anything of their world survive its quiet end? To find an answer, we must look not at ruins, but at living traditions, searching for faint but persistent echoes in the culture that followed. The most resonant of these echoes may be the sound of water. In the Hindu tradition, ritual purification through bathing holds profound spiritual significance. Pilgrims immerse themselves in sacred rivers, and temples often feature a water tank or well for ceremonial cleansing. This deep cultural connection to the sanctity of water finds a startling, ancient mirror in the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro. While we cannot draw a direct line, the parallel invites reflection. Could the importance of communal and ritual bathing, so central to later Indian spiritual life, have roots in practices that began in those meticulously engineered Indus pools? Similarly, the powerful bull, depicted with such reverence on countless Indus seals, remains a potent symbol of strength and sanctity in later Indian culture, venerated in Hinduism and celebrated in art and story. These are not proofs but whispers, suggestive threads that hint at a cultural memory woven into the fabric of the subcontinent. The search continues in language itself. Some linguists point to the ancient Dravidian language family, still spoken across southern India, and suggest its roots may stretch back to the Indus Valley. They look for potential substrate words, linguistic fossils embedded in later Sanskrit texts, that could have originated with the Indus people. The undeciphered script itself is the ultimate ghost in this machine. Its continued existence on thousands of artifacts is a silent challenge, a potential vessel for their thoughts that we cannot yet drink from. If it were ever read, it could transform whispers into a clear voice, confirming or denying the deep continuity many suspect. This idea of continuity extends beyond objects and words into the realm of thought. The Indus model of a seemingly non-violent, consensus-based social order stands in stark contrast to the kingly, martial states that often define ancient history. Centuries later, in the same fertile plains of the Ganges basin, revolutionary philosophies like Jainism and Buddhism took root. These traditions placed paramount emphasis on non-violence, ahimsa, and on spiritual authority derived from personal enlightenment and ethical living, not from hereditary kingship or military power. While separated by vast stretches of time, the ideological climate that allowed these pacifistic, introspective philosophies to flourish may have been subtly prepared by a much older cultural inclination toward social harmony over conquest. It is as if a certain predisposition was carried in the stories, the values, and the social instincts of the people who dispersed from the Indus cities and slowly blended with new communities. Of course, this is the realm of scholarly debate, not settled fact. The lack of a deciphered written record means every connection remains speculative. Some historians argue for a clean break, seeing the Vedic culture that later dominated the region as fundamentally different in language, social structure, and primary economic focus. They see the Indus legacy as one of physical artifacts alone, not of living tradition. This debate itself, however, is a powerful part of the civilization's enduring legacy. The very fact that we are compelled to ask these questions, to search for their reflection in later times, is a testament to their profound and mysterious impact. Their silent history does not end with their disappearance. It actively shapes scholarly inquiry and even cultural identity in the present day. It forces us to consider how civilizations truly transmit their essence, not just through stone and script, but through the subtle, resilient channels of daily practice, symbolic reverence, and social ideals that can persist long after cities turn to dust. This unresolved conversation between a silent past and a living present ensures that the Indus Valley civilization is never truly gone, as long as we are still listening for its echoes. The dirt itself now speaks through machines. While earlier archaeologists relied on shovels and intuition, today's researchers wield technologies that see through soil and time. Satellite imagery taken from hundreds of miles above the Earth can detect subtle variations in vegetation and soil moisture. These patterns, invisible to the human eye on the ground, often trace the ghostly outlines of ancient riverbeds or the buried foundations of long-forgotten walls. Through this eye in the sky, scientists have mapped the lost course of the Saraswati River with stunning clarity, confirming its gradual disappearance and its vital role in sustaining the civilization's eastern settlements. Even more remarkable, these scans have revealed hundreds of previously unknown settlement sites across the plains, dramatically expanding the known map of the Indus world and showing a much denser, more interconnected network than we ever imagined. Beneath the surface, another tool listens for echoes. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy into the earth, painting a detailed picture of what lies buried without moving a single grain of sand. This allows archaeologists to map entire neighborhoods, street grids, and even individual structures before any excavation begins. It is like having an X-ray for an entire city. At known sites, this technology has revealed sprawling, unexcavated suburbs, suggesting populations were larger than the visible ruins indicate. At newly discovered sites, it provides a blueprint guiding careful, targeted digs that maximize the information gained from each trench. The silent soil is no longer a barrier but a transparent ledger. The artifacts we already have are now telling new stories as well. In a laboratory, a chemist can analyze microscopic residues trapped in the pores of a 4,000-year-old cooking pot. These chemical fingerprints can reveal whether the last meal cooked in it was a dairy-based stew or a dish of grains, offering direct evidence of dietary habits and how they might have changed during times of hardship. Similarly, the source of clay in pottery can be pinpointed, tracing a vessel's journey from its origin to its final resting place, and thus mapping ancient trade routes with scientific precision. Even the bones of the inhabitants are read with new clarity. Isotopic analysis of teeth and bone can tell us about a person's diet throughout their life and even indicate whether they were born locally or had migrated from another region. All of this data is sharpened by advanced dating techniques. Radiocarbon dating, now more refined than ever, allows researchers to pin events to within decades rather than centuries. This precise timeline is crucial. It lets us see if the abandonment of a city in the north coincided with a severe drought period recorded in a cave stalagmite from Oman, or if a change in pottery styles preceded a climatic shift. Each technological leap provides a new piece of evidence, forcing theories to adapt. The climate change model, for instance, has been powerfully reinforced by this convergence of geological and archaeological data. Yet, these tools also complicate simple narratives. The discovery of so many new, smaller sites suggests the civilization's end was not a uniform event, but a mosaic of local adaptations and staggered abandonments, with some communities persisting in pockets long after the great cities were empty. This ongoing scientific journey means the story of the Indus is not a closed book, but a manuscript still being decoded. Every scan, every soil sample, and every chemical analysis adds a sentence, sometimes confirming what we suspected, other times forcing us to rewrite a chapter. It is a humbling and exciting process, a reminder that our understanding is always provisional, always awaiting the next discovery. This very uncertainty, however, is what fuels passionate debate among those who spend their lives studying this enigmatic culture, leading to controversies that are as much about how we interpret the past as they are about the past itself. The quiet of the Indus ruins is matched only by the lively debate it sparks in academic halls today. Far from a settled story, the civilization's disappearance is a vibrant intellectual battleground, where respected scholars clash over the meaning of the very same evidence. One prominent camp sees the environment as the undeniable protagonist, For them, the data from ice cores and dried riverbeds is the smoking gun, a clear, global trigger that no society of that era could have withstood. They argue that focusing on social collapse or migration patterns is merely describing the symptom, while the changing climate was the ultimate, inescapable cause. Yet another group of thinkers pushes back, insisting we must look inward. They acknowledge the drought but ask a crucial question: why did the society fail to adapt? Their focus is on the internal architecture of the Indus world, its apparent lack of centralized crisis management. They propose that its very peacefulness and decentralized structure, its greatest strengths in times of plenty, became fatal weaknesses when coordinated, large-scale action was needed to dredge canals or manage scarce resources. In this view, the climate provided the stress test, but it was the social and political fabric that ultimately tore. A smaller, more controversial school of thought still wonders if our picture is too peaceful. They point to a handful of skeletal remains from later periods that show possible signs of trauma, asking if we have been too quick to dismiss the role of conflict entirely. Could there have been low-level, localized strife over dwindling water or food, violence that left little archaeological trace compared to a full-scale invasion? While this remains a minority view, it underscores a critical point. The absence of evidence for war is not absolute proof of its total non-existence. These debates extend far beyond the cause of the end and into the heart of what the civilization even was. The mysterious script is a perfect example. Is it a true writing system, encoding a spoken language with grammar and syntax? If so, its brevity is baffling. Or is it a system of non-linguistic symbols representing concepts, clan names, or deities directly, more like a set of sophisticated trademarks? The answer would fundamentally change our understanding of their administrative complexity and their intellectual world. Similarly, the nature of their power structure is hotly contested. With no palaces or royal tombs, was this a uniquely stateless society? A vast network of merchant oligarchies and priestly planners who cooperated without a king? Or does the incredible uniformity suggest a soft theocracy, where a priestly class held immense ideological authority that maintained order? Or perhaps it was a collection of city-states with similar cultures but independent rulers whose symbols of power were made of perishable wood, leaving no stone trace? Each interpretation paints a radically different picture of daily life and decision-making. This vibrant clash of ideas is not a sign of failure in the field, but of its health. It is what prevents a simplistic, textbook narrative from hardening over a profoundly complex story. These controversies remind us that the mystery of the Indus is not a detective story with a missing clue, but a philosophical puzzle. We have an abundance of evidence, but it is wonderfully, frustratingly ambiguous, open to multiple credible readings. This is the inherent challenge and beauty of studying a society from the silent, prehistoric past, where every artifact is a sentence in a language we are still learning to speak. Engaging with these ongoing debates does more than fill academic journals. It prepares us to listen more carefully to the whispers from the dust, and to ask what this ancient experiment in urban peace might still teach us about the fragile foundations of our own world. Their story is not a relic, it is a reflection. The Indus Valley civilization presents us with a paradox, a society that mastered long-term sustainability in its daily operations yet may have fallen because it was too perfectly adapted to a single, stable world. Their cities were marvels of foresight, with public baths that recycled water and grid layouts that maximized airflow and community access, principles any modern urban planner would admire. They built an economy not on extraction or conquest, but on circular flows of trade and shared agricultural surplus, a model of remarkable balance that lasted for centuries. This achievement stands as a powerful alternative to the dominant narrative of history, which so often equates civilization with palaces, armies, and monuments to power. The Indus people proved that large-scale, complex society could be organized around consensus, commerce, and civic care, offering a glimpse of a path not taken. Yet their quiet fading also carries a sobering warning about resilience. Their system was exquisitely tuned to a specific set of environmental conditions, a predictable monsoon and a generous river. When that climate system shifted beyond a certain threshold, their specialized adaptation became a trap. Their decentralized, cooperative structure, so effective for maintaining peace and fair trade, may have lacked the centralized authority or coercive capacity to mobilize a continent-spanning response to a crisis that required just that, to dredge massive new canals, to relocate entire populations, or to enforce rationing in the face of scarcity. They were a masterpiece of engineering for a static world, but the world, as it always does, began to move. This historical case study holds up a mirror to our own globalized civilization. We too have built a world of astonishing interdependence and specialization, a just-in-time network of trade and technology that relies on stable climates, predictable growing seasons, and uninterrupted supply chains. Our prosperity, like theirs, is built upon a set of assumptions about how the natural world functions. The Indus lesson is not that their society was weak, but that any system, no matter how sophisticated, faces profound vulnerability when it becomes too rigid, too optimized for a reality that is beginning to change. Their story urges us to consider the foundations of our own stability. Are we investing in flexibility and redundancy, in systems that can adapt and bend without breaking? Or are we, in our pursuit of maximum efficiency, creating a new form of specialization that could leave us just as exposed to a shifting world? The haunting question their fate leaves us with is not simply what happened to them, but what we can learn about building societies that are not only peaceful and prosperous, but also resilient enough to endure when the ground, both literal and metaphorical, begins to shift beneath our feet. For decades, the most dramatic explanation for the end of the Indus Valley was a story of conquest. This was the Aryan invasion theory, a narrative that once dominated textbooks and seemed to offer a clear, heroic answer to the mystery. It proposed that around 1500 BCE, waves of light-skinned, horse-riding warriors from the Central Asian steppes swept down into the subcontinent. These nomadic tribes, calling themselves Arya in their ancient hymns, the Rig Veda, were said to have overwhelmed the peaceful, urban Indus people with their superior military technology, particularly the horse-drawn chariot. The theory was elegant in its simplicity. It explained the disappearance of one culture and the rise of another, linking the fall of the Indus cities to the dawn of the Vedic age in India. Its appeal was rooted in the linguistic connections scholars found between Sanskrit, the language of the Rig Veda, and ancient Iranian and European tongues, suggesting a shared ancestral homeland and a great migration. For a long time, this story of a clash of civilizations seemed to fit the facts, or at least the facts as they were understood a century ago. But archaeology, with its patient, empirical voice, began to tell a different story entirely. When teams meticulously sifted through the layers of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, they searched in vain for the clear evidence such an invasion would leave behind. They found no city walls shattered by siege engines, no neighborhoods reduced to a uniform layer of ash from a great burning, no mass graves of defenders cut down in the streets. More tellingly, they found no sudden, overwhelming influx of a new material culture in the archaeological record. The beautiful, standardized Indus pottery did not vanish overnight to be replaced by an entirely different style used by the supposed conquerors. Instead, it slowly, gradually evolved and simplified, fading away over centuries. One of the most decisive clues was the absence of the horse. The Vedic culture revered the horse, using it to pull swift chariots in both ceremony and, presumably, in war. Yet in the mature layers of the Indus cities, no horse bones have been found. The primary domesticated animals were humped cattle, water buffalo, and sheep. If a horse-based culture had conquered these cities, we would expect to find their signature animal in the ruins, but it simply is not there. Finally, the timeline itself unravels the invasion narrative. The Great Urban Decline was largely complete by 1900 BCE, a full 4 centuries before the generally accepted period for the arrival of Indo-Aryan-speaking groups into the region. This gap of hundreds of years is far too wide to support a direct cause and effect relationship. Dismantling this myth was not just an academic exercise, it was a crucial turning point. It forced historians to stop looking for an external villain and to start looking inward at the civilization's own relationship with its environment and its social structures. It shifted the focus from a dramatic, violent end to a slow, complex transformation, recognizing that the most profound collapses are often quiet ones. Clearing away this old story allows us to see the Indus fade on its own terms, a process governed by river and drought rather than by sword and spear. Yet, in dismissing one grand narrative, we open the door to other, more speculative whispers that drift in from the edges of history, possibilities that challenge our understanding in even stranger ways. Silence has a way of inviting the wildest stories. When a civilization leaves behind magnificent ruins but no written history, the void does not stay empty for long. It fills with whispers, with speculation, and sometimes with tales that stretch the boundaries of belief. Beyond the careful theories of climate and social change, there exists a vibrant underworld of fringe ideas, each attempting to solve the Indus mystery with a single, spectacular cause. One of the most persistent is the notion of a cataclysmic flood, a deluge so immense it wiped the cities clean and lingered in cultural memory. It is true that the region experienced devastating floods, and the idea that such an event could seed a great flood myth, echoed in later Mesopotamian and Vedic stories, is not entirely far-fetched. Yet archaeology finds no uniform layer of silt across all the cities, no single horizon of destruction that points to one apocalyptic event. The flooding was likely repeated and local, a symptom of the changing climate rather than its singular, dramatic finale. Even more fantastical are the claims of lost, advanced knowledge. Some look at the precise city planning and standardized weights and imagine a society wielding a forgotten science. This speculation reaches its peak with a bizarre and enduring myth about Mohenjo-Daro itself. In the 1960s, a writer suggested that certain piles of fused debris and what appeared to be vitrified or glassified material at the site were evidence of an ancient atomic explosion. The idea captured imaginations, proposing that this peaceful civilization was vaporized by a weapon of unimaginable power. Geologists and archaeologists, however, quickly provided mundane and conclusive explanations. The vitrified material is simply the result of ordinary, high-temperature firing of bricks, or, in some cases, the immense heat generated by a lightning strike on a concentrated pile of pottery and brick. There is no radiation, no blast pattern, no evidence whatsoever for such an event. The story is a fiction, but its stubborn appeal is revealing. Why do these dramatic narratives persist in the face of clear, scientific rebuttal? They speak less about the Indus people and more about us. A slow death by drought is a complex, impersonal tragedy. It lacks a villain, a moment of climax, a clear moral. The human mind craves narrative closure, and a civilization this magnificent seems to deserve an ending equally grand, whether by divine flood or cosmic fire. These fringe theories are monuments to our own discomfort with ambiguity. They highlight the profound mystique generated by a historical silence, showing how easily we can fill the gaps with the myths of our own era, projecting our fears of nuclear war or dreams of lost golden ages onto the distant past. Engaging with these ideas, even to gently set them aside, serves a vital purpose. It reminds us of the disciplined beauty of the scientific method, which builds understanding brick by patient brick from sediment cores and pottery shards rather than from sensational leaps. It underscores that the most truthful stories are often the quietest, woven from 1,000 threads of evidence rather than a single, thunderous bolt from the blue. This return to evidence is where the real magic of the story lies, not in fantasy, but in the emerging, nuanced synthesis of all we have learned. The story of their ending is not a single thread, but a tapestry unraveling from multiple corners at once. Picture the first and most powerful thread as the changing sky itself, a prolonged climatic shift that weakened the life-giving monsoons and sent the great river systems into chaos. This was not a single bad season, but a creeping, centuries-long drought that slowly strangled the agricultural heart of the civilization. Fields that had reliably fed thousands for generations began to fail, their soils turning saline and their yields diminishing with each passing year. This environmental betrayal was the primary trigger, the domino that set all others in motion. The economic shock was immediate and profound. The surplus grain that filled the public granaries and funded the entire urban experiment simply vanished. Without this agricultural wealth, the intricate trade networks that bound distant cities together began to wither. A merchant in Lothal could no longer send cotton to Mesopotamia if the farmers who grew it were starving. A beadmaker in Harappa had no market for his carnelian if no one could pay him in food. The economic glue that held the civilization together across a vast region lost its adhesive power, leaving each community increasingly isolated and self-reliant. This isolation exposed the potential fragility in their peaceful, decentralized social structure. For centuries, their consensus-based governance, free from a powerful king or a standing army, was their greatest strength, fostering cooperation and civic pride. Yet in a crisis of this magnitude, that same structure may have become a liability. There was no central authority with the unquestioned power to coordinate a continent-spanning response, to forcibly redistribute the last stores of grain from a well-stocked city to a starving one, or to marshal a labor army to dredge the failing rivers. Each city, each neighborhood was left to confront the scarcity with its own dwindling resources. The social contract, built on shared prosperity, began to fracture under the strain of hunger and uncertainty. Why maintain the communal bath or repair the city drain when your children need food? The grand ideology of urban harmony, so visible in their meticulous city planning, lost its meaning when the city could no longer provide its most basic function, security. The logical, human response to this cascading failure was not to fight a war that could not be won, but to make a quiet, pragmatic choice. Families and whole communities began to abandon the magnificent, now dysfunctional, urban centers. They gathered their tools, their seeds, and their knowledge, and they migrated generation by generation toward the east and south, following the promise of reliable water in the Ganges basin and beyond. This was not a panicked flight, but a calculated adaptation, a strategic retreat from a way of life that the environment could no longer support. In these new regions, they encountered other peoples and slowly blended with them, their Indus knowledge of metallurgy, pottery, and weights weaving into new cultural formations. The civilization did not violently die, it peacefully transformed, its population absorbed and its technologies repurposed. This multi-causal model, an environmental trigger leading to economic collapse and then social adaptation, finally makes sense of the silent archaeological record. It explains the empty cities without signs of battle, the gradual decline in craftsmanship, and the lack of a clear, conquering culture overlying the ruins. It reframes the entire narrative from one of catastrophic collapse to one of profound, resilient transformation. The Indus people were not defeated by an enemy or a single disaster. They were faced with an insurmountable, slow-moving challenge, and they changed their world to survive it. This perspective invites us to reconsider what true civilizational longevity might look like, not as an unbroken line of imperial glory, but as the enduring, adaptable spirit of a people who chose to walk into a new future rather than perish clinging to the past. Their silent cities have a curious afterlife in our modern dreams. While they left no written epics, the Indus Valley civilization has become a powerful story we tell ourselves, a blank page in the ancient world upon which we project our own hopes and anxieties. In classrooms around the globe, it holds a quiet, foundational place in history textbooks, often presented as one of the three great early river-valley societies alongside Egypt and Mesopotamia. Yet its chapter is frequently the shortest, its narrative lacking the dramatic pharaohs, epic wars, and golden treasures that captivate young minds. It is the civilization of well-planned drains and standardized weights, a story of remarkable engineering but, on the surface, less obvious drama. This very quietness, however, is what makes it so irresistible to the imagination outside the classroom. When the facts are few, fiction rushes in to fill the silence. In novels and films, the Indus Valley is often reimagined as a utopian paradise, a peaceful, advanced society that achieved perfect harmony before its mysterious vanishing. This portrayal taps directly into a deep human longing for a lost golden age, a time before conflict and corruption, making its disappearance feel like a profound tragedy for all humanity. Alternatively, it becomes a stage for adventure, a setting in video games and speculative fiction where explorers and treasure hunters decipher its cryptic script to unlock ancient secrets or discover remnants of forgotten, almost magical technology. These stories play creatively with the real gaps in our knowledge, the undeciphered writing, the absence of obvious temples or palaces, the sudden quiet in the archaeological record, transforming historical mystery into thrilling narrative fuel. This popular representation, while not always accurate, serves a vital and unexpected purpose. It keeps the civilization alive in the public consciousness. A teenager encountering a ruined Indus city in a video game might be prompted to look it up, sparking a lifelong interest. The aura of mystery generated by a best-selling novel or a documentary can translate into public support and crucial funding for new archaeological digs and scientific research. In a very real way, the speculative stories we weave around Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa help pay for the shovels and satellite scans that uncover their true story. This cultural echo demonstrates a beautiful paradox. A civilization that left no written history of its own has become a prolific author in our collective imagination. Its silence is not an ending, but an invitation, one that ensures its enigmatic story continues to be told, re-examined, and passionately investigated with every generation that wonders about a world built on peace and lost to time. That vanished civilization holds a mirror to our own fragile world. The study of the Indus Valley is far more than an academic puzzle. It is a stark, 4,000-year-old case study in human vulnerability. It demonstrates with unsettling clarity how environmental shifts, even slow-moving ones, can unravel the most sophisticated and peaceful of societies. Their cities were marvels of engineering, their social contract seemingly robust, yet it was their profound dependence on a stable climate that became their single point of failure. In an era of our own planetary changes, their story is not just history, it is a cautionary tale written in dust and dried riverbeds. It asks us to look at the foundations of our global civilization, built on assumptions of stable weather patterns and predictable growing seasons, and to consider our own resilience. Their experience suggests that sustainability is not just about technology, but about building systems flexible enough to adapt when the old rules no longer apply. Beyond the environmental warning, their civilization offers a powerful, almost radical counter-narrative. In a historical record dominated by kings, conquests, and empires, the Indus stands apart as a potential precedent for something different, a large-scale society that may have organized itself around cooperation, commerce, and shared infrastructure rather than hierarchy and aggression. While we cannot romanticize their past, their existence alone expands our imagination for what human communities can be. It proves that complex urban life does not inherently require palaces, standing armies, or monuments to individual power. This legacy provides a profound alternative storyline, one that challenges the notion that conflict and centralization are the only engines of civilization. For the scientists and historians who dedicate their lives to this mystery, the Indus represents the ultimate challenge. It is a detective story where the witnesses are silent and the evidence is entirely material. This forces archaeology to become a truly interdisciplinary dance, weaving together climatology, chemistry, geology, and satellite imaging to hear the story the artifacts cannot tell aloud. Every new scan of the soil, every isotope analysis of a tooth, is an attempt to give voice to a world that left no written testimony. This painstaking work pushes the boundaries of how we understand the human past, proving that even the quietest histories can speak volumes if we learn how to listen. Ultimately, the silent cities of the Indus serve as a humbling monument to transience. They remind us that no achievement, no matter how grand or peaceful, is permanent. Their fate underscores the profound, inescapable interconnectedness of environment, economy, and social structure, a lesson that resonates deeply in our interconnected modern age. This enduring relevance, this blend of warning and inspiration, ensures that their story will never truly be over. As long as we face questions about climate, cooperation, and survival, we will keep returning to those ancient, well-planned streets, searching for answers in their enduring silence. The bones themselves are beginning to speak a language we are only now learning to hear. Within the resting places of the Indus people, a new frontier of discovery is opening, one that reads history not from artifacts but from the very chemistry of life. Scientists are now applying ancient DNA analysis to carefully preserved skeletal remains, a delicate process that seeks to trace the genetic threads of this population. Did they possess a distinct genetic signature that simply faded away, or does their DNA reveal a clear line of continuity, woven into the genetic tapestry of populations living in the region today? This research could finally answer whether the civilization's end was a story of replacement or of profound integration. At the same time, isotopic analysis of teeth acts as a personal diary of an individual's life. By studying the chemical signatures locked in dental enamel, researchers can reconstruct a person's diet from childhood and even detect if they migrated from one geological region to another during their lifetime. Were the citizens of Mohenjo-Daro lifelong residents, or did some travel great distances to live there? This data moves us from grand theories about migration to intimate stories of individual journeys, painting a human-scale portrait of a society in motion. The ultimate key, however, remains the silent script, the search for a bilingual inscription, a single artifact bearing the same text in both the Indus symbols and a known language, is the holy grail of this field. Such a discovery would be the Rosetta Stone for this civilization, instantly unlocking the meaning behind thousands of seals and inscriptions. Archaeologists also hold hope for finding a longer text, perhaps on a perishable material like wood or leather that did not survive the millennia, that could reveal grammar and context. Until then, the script is a locked door, and behind it lies the potential to hear their own voices, their names for their cities, their prayers, and their laws. This quest drives explorations into new physical frontiers as well. Teams are now looking to the landscape itself, employing ground-penetrating radar and satellite surveys to scan the now dry beds of the ancient Saraswati River, searching for settlements swallowed by the shifting sands. Offshore, in the Arabian Sea, underwater archaeologists probe the depths near ancient ports like Lothal, hoping to find submerged structures or shipwrecks that could reveal secrets of their maritime trade and final days. Every unanswered question fuels a new generation of explorers. What exact form did their governance take? A council of elders, a guild of merchants, a theocracy of priests? What were the full contours of their belief system, and how did it shape their renowned peacefulness? Can we pinpoint a more detailed timeline of their dispersal, city by city, community by community? These are not mere academic exercises. They are investigations into one of humanity's most successful and enigmatic social experiments. The thrilling reality is that the story of the Indus Valley civilization is far from a closed book. It is a living inquiry where the next shovel of earth, the next satellite image, or the next lab result could fundamentally rewrite a chapter we thought we understood. This vibrant, ongoing mystery ensures that their legacy is not static, but a conversation that continues to evolve, inviting us all to witness the next piece of the puzzle as it slowly clicks into place. Their legacy rests not in monuments to kings, but in the quiet power of a question. The Indus Valley civilization endures not in ruined citadels or tales of conquest, but in the profound mystery of its peaceful existence and its quiet, transformative end. For over a millennium, they built a world on principles that still feel strikingly modern: standardization over statues, trade over troops, and ultimately, adaptation over annihilation. We have walked through their grid-planned streets and traced the slow betrayal of their rivers. We have seen how their vast economic networks, once humming with carnelian and cotton, could fray when the grain stopped growing. We have considered how their unique social fabric, woven from consensus and cooperation, may have unraveled from within when faced with a crisis no amount of civic planning could fix. Their story dismantles the ancient narrative that civilization requires a sword in its hand. Here was a society that reached a scale and sophistication rivaling Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet it left behind no grand palaces, no boastful carvings of vanquished foes, no arsenals of spears. Their greatest architectural achievement was a bathhouse for communal purity, their most common artifact a merchant's seal. This radical difference forces us to expand our very definition of power and success in the ancient world. True strength, their ruins suggest, might also be found in well-maintained drains, in fair weights for market trade, and in a social contract that for centuries made large-scale warfare seem unnecessary. Their disappearance, therefore, cannot be read as a simple defeat. What we have witnessed in the layers of dust is not a collapse in the traditional, violent sense, but something more complex, a pragmatic, generations-long response to a world that was fundamentally changing around them. When the environmental foundations shifted, they made the collective choice to transform rather than to perish. They dispersed, carrying their knowledge into new landscapes, weaving their innovations into the fabric of succeeding cultures. This is a profound lesson in resilience. It shows that the end of a specific way of life is not always a tragedy. Sometimes it is the necessary prelude to survival. The silent cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro now stand as gentle giants of history, challenging our assumptions. They ask us to look at our own global civilization, with its deep specializations and intricate dependencies, and to consider our own vulnerabilities. What foundations are our cities built upon, and how flexible are we when those foundations begin to move? The Indus people teach us that longevity may depend less on the monuments we build and more on our capacity to change course, to adapt with dignity when the old rivers no longer flow. If this journey into a silent past has reshaped how you see the roots of human society, consider subscribing for more explorations into history's greatest mysteries. We would love to hear your perspective in the comments below. After walking through all the evidence, what do you believe was the most significant factor in the Indus Valley's lasting, enigmatic silence?